everyone. Today we're going to talk about a subject that's very dear and close to my heart, about access to land. My name's Jyoti Fernandes. I'm a farmer in Dorset in the UK. And we're going to be speaking with Chris and Nury about their experiences with access to land, the importance of access to land to their communities, and the way that the organizations they work with are enabling access to land. I myself became a farmer, not coming from a farming background. I mean, in generations before it was. And access to land, me personally, had a very strong, created a strong sense of meaning for my life. And in fact, has become the source of livelihood for my entire family. But, my husband and I, when we moved to England, we couldn't find any jobs. We had no income and we had no recourse to public funds. And we didn't really know what we were going to do because I was expecting a baby. We found a place where someone was offering a place for us on some land that was not owned by anyone. And we built a little home. We got a solar panel and provided our own electricity, and we started growing all of our own food. And that enabled us to live with, a job that my husband managed to find one day a week, cleaning somewhere. And, it was a lifestyle that we were thrown into, and land provided us a real support net and security for us. And, I grew to really, truly value how wonderful the land is there. It's the true social security net that we have. And from there, I learned farming skills so we could grow more of our own food. And then went to start to work for land rights and access to land for people in the UK. And have dedicated my life to that ever since, 4 children later. So I just wanted to read a small passage from a magazine that we started in our land rights group called The Land Magazine. It's written by my colleague Simon Fairley, that many of you will be familiar with in the UK. And then I'm going to pass you to Chris and Nury to explain their experiences. This is from our manifesto. In these times, the powers that be offer only one solution to the world's problems: money. Free trade, more access to the market. Land is rarely mentioned. The more people are dependent on the market, the more securely they can be roped into the fiscal and political hierarchy. But anyone that has land already has access to energy, water, nourishment, shelter, healing, wisdom, ancestors, and a grave. Access to land is not simply a threat to landowning elites. It's a threat to the religion of unlimited economic growth and the power structure that depends upon it. The global market uproots and destroys land-based human cultures. In the end, a rootless global market will destroy itself. Rome fell, the Soviet Empire collapsed, the New World Order is imploding before our eyes. Nothing is forever in history except geography. The only source of wealth is the earth. Capitalism is a confidence trick, a dazzling edifice built on paper promises. But when it crumbles, the land will remain. So that's the philosophy I've been working towards for the last 20 years in our organization. And I want to invite Chris and Nury to speak and explain where they are and their story in relation to land, how the organizations they work with enable access to land, and how access to land enables the communities they work with to practice regenerative agroecology, which is the theme we're discussing at this conference, and provide food security for the communities, especially those who are experiencing food insecurity and low incomes. So I'm going to pass it first to Chris, and then to Nury to speak for 15 minutes each, and then invite the audience to answer questions. Thank you. I really look forward to hearing you speak.
Hello, everybody. Good morning from Tucson, Arizona. First off, I'd just like to burn some sage for everybody in the world to, have a good day, evening, night, morning, wherever you are. You know, sending positive thoughts and prayers out to each and one of you who may be joining us from across the world. Right now, you know, we are living in one of the most challenging times that that we have ever experienced. So, you know, I just like to burn some sage for all of us here. Let's have a good productive session here, and I just like to thank everybody for allowing me to be here and to speak as well. So, um, my name is Chris Honahnie. Chris Honahnie yan pahan mati wa lomoki ba yan hopi mati wa kita. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chris Honahnie. My Hopi name is Lomokoiva, which translates to the nicely growing tobacco plant. I am currently living in Tucson, Arizona, in the U.S. And I am of Hopi and Dene background. Those are my two indigenous peoples that I've come from. And where I come from is a high desert area of northern Arizona. So if you know where the Grand Canyon is, my people live about an hour away from where the Grand Canyon is. And the Grand Canyon actually ties into what we're going to talk about, well, at least what I'm going to talk about today, because when we're talking about land, and to my people, the Hopi people, we believe that this land is not ours. We were given the responsibility to take care of this land by a higher being. And so our relationship to the land is different than most people. You know, we don't own the land. We don't believe in, you know, fences or boundaries. You know, we see land as continuous. We see it as something that is not blocked from our view. We believe that we're able to travel this land and use the land responsibly, as long as we're using it responsibly. And so that's the point that I, you know, well, also like to make today. But you know, first off, you know, as I was saying, the Hopi people, us, we believe that, you know, this land, it was given to us so that we can grow varieties of crops such as corn, beans, squash, using only rainwater. We don't use any sort of irrigation because there's no water in our area. We don't have any lakes, rivers, or streams. It's very barren when you look at it. But when you're actually farming the land, when you're actually putting your hands into the soil, you know that the history, a long history of agroecology has been there. And agroecology is a very interesting term to be using nowadays because it's new to me, even though I've been practicing agroecology since I was born, basically. My people have been practicing agroecology before agroecology was even a term. And so access to land today for indigenous peoples, and my perspectives really come from the indigenous peoples of North America. I know indigenous peoples across the world face different realities and different challenges. So, you know, I don't want to speak for other indigenous peoples who face a different challenge or reality that I do here in North America, and more specifically the US. And I'm sure many people have heard what has been going on here in the US recently. And that just goes to show that we are still a long ways from justifying the return of lands back to the native indigenous peoples of North America. And when I say that, you know, I'm talking about social injustice. I'm talking about racism. I'm talking about these things that we might not think are tied to agroecology or tied to land access, but that is an obstacle that we have to overcome before we even get to getting our land back. And I say that because that's a term that's being used a lot more here in the US, is this term of land back, giving the land back to indigenous peoples so that we are able to take care of it responsibly, to be the stewards of the land again. Because when you look at indigenous peoples' farming practices, gathering practices, you'll see that for many of these practices, if not all of these practices, they're regenerative. They give back to the land. They help to ensure that that food source will be there in the future. So, you know, when I'm talking about that, I'm thinking about our wild food gatherers who will only pick a certain number of fruit from a certain number of plants. And so in the area that I live in is the traditional homelands of the Tanatan people, and they're a desert people who survive off of many of the wild foods in this area, as well as the crops that they grow as well. But our practices for thousands of years has not taken away from the land as much as the practices that you'll see in commercial farming, in these large scale industrial farms where people aren't there. And that's the key, is having people on the land to do the work, not having, you know, tractors and machines do this work, because you lose that connection to your food source. And that's what many people, many of our youth today have lost, that connection to our original food sources. And that's what we really, really need to get back to, especially in this day of social injustice and the pandemic and everything else that's going on. You know, we saw in the beginning of the pandemic, our grocery stores go empty. We saw panic, we saw confusion, but in reality, we used to live without those things. And we've been basically brainwashed to survive this way. We've been brainwashed to know to only be reliant on the grocery stores, on the convenience stores, on you know, these things that aren't indigenous systems. And so when we're thinking about accessing land, we're thinking about something bigger than that. We're not just, you know, wanting our land back just so we can build another casino, which many people, you know, don't, you know, want that to happen. Many non-indigenous people think they just want this land so they can build another casino, or they can, you know, trash it or whatever. Because many people come to our reservations and say, wow, this is like a third world country. And many people don't know the reality of how our indigenous peoples live today. And when you think of the US, you think, well, they're probably not living in poverty like these other countries. But yet when you come to my home area, my home lands of northern Arizona, of the Navajo Hopi reservations, you'll see many people that look like they're living in poverty, but really we have that knowledge. We have the rights to be able to go back to our lands and not take control, but reclaim our role as stewards of the land. You know, we don't want to own it. We don't want to profit off of it. We want to take care of it. And we want to make sure that that land will be as healthy as it is now and for the future 50, 100 years, 1,000 years from now. You know, one of the most important lessons I learned growing up as a farmer was to be prepared for the unexpected, to save enough seed for the next 4 years, because you never know what's going to happen. In the world that we're living in today, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if I'll be attacked on the street because of the color of my skin, because of my hair. Actually, this is the first time I've ever grown my hair out long, and I'm proud of it, because it gives me that identity. It reminds me of who I am and where I come from, and why it's important for us to advocate on behalf of other Indigenous peoples, and to advocate for Indigenous peoples' land rights and their access to their land rights. And so in my work, I work for the International Indian Treaty Council, which is a nonprofit based here in Tucson, Arizona, but we work with Indigenous peoples across the globe. And we work to ensure that their rights are being recognized and protected. And so much of our work is rights-based work. We approach a lot of our work through the human rights sector. And so one thing, or a couple of things that I really kind of wanted to talk about was the United Nations Declarations on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. There's a few pieces in there, articles in there. I mean, if you haven't heard of it before, I encourage you to go through it and read all of those articles, and to see what Indigenous peoples are, what our rights are, and what, how we need to be treated and how we need to be respected, because that respect has been lost. And we're trying to gain that back. But going back to the declaration, there's a couple pieces in there that, I wanted to really highlight. In the main piece I wanted to highlight was Article 25 in this document, which says, Indigenous peoples have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinctive spiritual relationship with their traditionally owned or otherwise occupied and used lands, territories, waters, and coastal seas, and other resources, and to uphold their responsibilities to future generations in this regard. So when we're talking about accessing land, we're not just, asking for this land back just for ourselves. We're asking it back for our future generations, because we have that responsibility to ensure that our future generations have everything they need to live a happy, healthy, successful life. And if that is continuing to be taken away from us as a people, as Hopi people, as Dene people, we're gonna die. We're gonna disappear. Our culture is gonna die, and that is a very sad thing to think about, because if our people die out, if our culture dies out, our knowledge dies out. And our knowledge, includes many of these different regenerative agricultural practices that many non-Indigenous peoples are looking to ask today about. How do we grow food like you? How do we do these things like you guys? How do we do that? But they're not asking it in that same way. They're kind of stealing it. People are continuing to steal from us, stealing our knowledge, stealing our practices, not asking for permission. And that's something that really needs to be remembered, is to ask, ask Indigenous peoples what their perspectives are. Ask people to learn things, because many people are stuck in this box that they don't want to get out of. They don't want to get out of their comfort zones. They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to hear the truth about what's really happening and what needs to happen. And so working with the Treaty Council, I've only been working with the Treaty Council for about a year now. Before that, I was working on a farm, and I was going to school and mainly focusing on farming. But now my focus has turned to encouraging other Indigenous peoples to fight for their rights. We have rights as Indigenous peoples. We have the right to the land. We do. We have the right to the land that we used to live on. And many people don't know that our people have moved over time, like just as the Hopi people have. We haven't lived in that one area for thousands of years. We've actually moved across different areas to find where the most fertile lands will be for growing food. We moved according to what the environment was telling us. And today we are facing probably the worst drought we faced in a very, very long time in this region. Last year was the hottest year on record, and it was also the driest year on record. And that really spelled out what needs to happen in the future. We need to continue to grow our foods in our traditional ways, gather our foods in our traditional ways, because that is what's going to save us. That's what's going to keep us alive, and that's what's going to allow us to share our knowledge with everybody else. You know, we don't want to just keep it for ourselves. You know, we know that other people in the world are facing the same challenges, and it's important for us to go and share this knowledge with people. So we're asking, you know, our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters to really think about, you know, if you own property, you know, do you really need that property? Or, you know, do you think that, you know, it could be used to benefit more people in a certain way? And to think about, you know, was this land originally Indigenous people's land? Was this an area where Indigenous peoples used to come and gather wild foods and such? You know, I've experienced, you know, racism through many different ways. And one of those ways was through, you know, going to one of my traditional food gathering places and being told, no, you can't pick through here because this is closed off. This is private property. This isn't your land. You know, we took it from you, but it's not yours anymore. And there's nothing really you can do about it. And today, in today's age, it's really, really hard to figure out, how do we solve this problem? How do we get people to agree with what Indigenous peoples think and want to do? Mainly, yeah.
I think we might pass to Nury now so she can have a chance to talk, and then we'll have some more questions. But it's amazing.
Sorry, yeah,
no, it's so good.
I want to keep talking, so but thank you.
I just want to keep hearing and hearing, you know.
Yeah, sorry, Nury, let Nury speak for now. Thank you.
You're amazing. Nury, can you share your experiences as well and what you're doing across Latin America to enable more access to land? And then we'll go to questions and we can ask questions of both of wonderful speakers.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank you for the space that we have been given in order to share some of the experiences that we are having in my country, in our continent. As a member of the Via Campesina Internacional, I would like to share some experiences. We have been working for 25 years to promote the access to land. For an organization like Agro, which is my grassroots organizations, we are 43 years old. And we have been fighting in order to ensure the access to land. First of all, we must say that we build our work on the principles of food sovereignty, human rights, the right to food, the right to peasant agriculture, and agriculture that incorporates the cosmovision of original peoples, including the access to the land and to common goods. This is something that we have been fighting for since the very beginning. We also work in order to ensure that, this is sometimes it's not understood in different places, but in Latin America, we have been fighting in order to have an integral agrarian reform. We were in the conference in 2015 with colleagues from all over the world. We propose an integral popular agrarian reform to ensure equal rights for women, men, young people, peasant women and peasant men, and also to strengthen rural communities to make social relations in the rural areas more democratic. We are talking about the social function of our land. What does the land mean for any society, for any country? This is something that we need to take into account. It has to do with the democratization in the access to land, social relations, cultural relations in rural areas. That's why we say this. Unfortunately, we live in a world where we have more and more land grabbing every time. There are fewer and fewer people with more land in all countries, and most peasants and rural communities, like the original peoples, do not have access to land and everything that this implies beyond access to land in itself. So that's what we need to work on, to create an alliance between cities and rural areas. We think that this is not a problem exclusive to rural communities and peasants. For us in Latin America, indigenous peoples, black communities, etc., we are talking about society as a whole. We need to challenge the current industrial food system. This means that we need to face transnational companies which control the food system all over the world. That's why in our debate, what Chris just said is really important when we talk about the fact that we are not only fighting about the possibility of having access to land, we are talking about the territory. That's not only about land rights. We need to see this as a collective needs. The territory is a space for the collective organization of peasants. This space must also be spaces for resistance, to struggle, to have cultural exchanges, to build peace. We say that access to land and living in the field to produce food is a way of building peace. This is something that needs to be understood both in rural areas and in cities. There is a need to have this alliance in order to build peace in different countries where we know that land grabbing is not only this is not something that has been done voluntarily, but rather it has been done by criminalization, evictions, etc. That's why we think that this alliance between the cities and the rural areas is essential. Society as a whole needs to understand what the social function of the land is, as we see enshrined in the Declaration of on the Rights of Peasants. We, in our different territories, we need to think about how we use the land, what is the social function that we need to give to our land. That's what we need to work on, and we need to focus on healthy food based on agroecology. When we say that we are against agrotoxicals, when we say that we are against cruel seeds, that means that we need to produce in a different way that allows us not only to produce healthy food, but also to take care of the environment and our ecosystems. We need to take care of our Mother Earth. That's why agroecology is so important for us. In Latin America, we have implemented agroecology schools. We have several Latin American agroecology institutes, 9 in America. We have 1 in Colombia, the Maria Cano Institute. What we do there is to train technicians that have some political training as well, technical and political training, but we want specifically people that want to stay in rural areas, to work and defend our rural areas from the spot. That's the way we are trying to fight against the interests of transnational companies that are trying to impose these GMOs. They want to use our land just for extractivist purposes. And what they do this by evicting the original peoples and peasants from their land. This is a violent act done by these corporations against nature and the environment. That's why we consider that in the territories where there are more and more assassinations, it's usually related to our struggle to defend our land and our rights and our lives. What we are building and what we are doing regarding the access to land implies agrarian reform. We also want to have public policies to support the proposals by peasant movements to create schools, to have training, and to also understand what our social role is in each of the different territories. I would like to point out that in our struggle for many years, we have elaborated some guidelines on land property. They were passed 10 years ago, but in the working agendas of each of the territories, we use it as a tool in our struggle, as well as the declaration on the rights of peasants, where it is stated that the social function of the land must be taken into account, that land must be restituted to indigenous peasants and those that have been evicted from the lands. That's why these tools that we have developed are so important. We also need to have our own media where we can use to inform society. We must inform our base, and we need to establish a dialogue with society. We need to win the hearts and minds of everyone, regardless of the fact of their origin, even if they are not peasants or indigenous peoples. When I had access to land, when I started working on the land, I realized that this is something that goes beyond ourselves. This is a collective work that we need to do with our communities and with society as a whole. That's why we think that one of the main challenges that we have is to keep on strengthening alliances with other sectors in the field and in cities, with other organizations that fight in order to defend the rights of indigenous and original peoples, Black communities, and in the cities with workers that identify themselves with this need of having access to healthy food and not considering food as just as a commodity. We need to strengthen our alliances, and we also need to carry out joint mobilization at national and international level. What is happening in Latin America, as we said in the conference in 2015, also in Europe. Europe is a developed continent, but even in Europe, some people or many people are fighting in order to have access to land. In Europe, there's also a need for an agrarian reform. That's why this is a global issue, and we need to have global actions that, in the context of the pandemic, shows everyone the importance of having access to land, the importance of democratizing the land, and the importance of producing healthy food products, and to keep on living on these territories so that our rural areas do not are not destroyed by this extractivist mentality. We are international and internationalist militants that show solidarity in different ways. We want to mobilize the capability of people all over the world. The pandemic today has placed us at the core of this struggle. We need to take care while we keep on producing food, and we keep on fighting in order to obtain an agrarian reform that is democratic and that plays a role and social role, so that we can keep on producing food and build peace in our territories. That would be the message that I would like to convey in this space. Thank you for inviting me to this conference.
Thank you so much. Viva! Yeah, I always feel so proud to be a part of this movement with La Via Campesina and working with Indigenous people around the world, just to know that this amazing work is being done and the scale it's being done is phenomenal. There's a question to you, Nury, which was put forward by someone in the session, which is, which corporations are the worst offenders for violations of land rights in Colombia? And yeah, if everybody didn't understand before, Nury is based in Colombia, and they've had tremendous issues with many of their activists that they work with being assassinated by the government, and for the amazing work that they do there. And I think people would like to stand in solidarity with them and find out which corporations are the worst offenders for land rights.
Thank you very much for this question, and thank you for your solidarity. Indeed, in Colombia, now we are in a different moment. We have been living in a situation of conflict, of war for many years, and then a peace building process was initiated. And why? The origin of this conflict was related to the access to land. 1.4% of the population in Colombia owns 46% of our land. Land grabbing is a huge problem in Colombia, and it was imposed violently. We have over 6 million migrants in our territory, displaced people. We have had massacres in order to evict peasants from their land. This happened in the 60s, and 70s, 80s, even the 90s, and then in 2000, when the neoliberal model and land grabbing model was imposed, we realized that the owners of those lands where peasants were evicted violently were usually corporations. We have people extracting gold. As you know, Colombia has 3 sierras, and we have many natural resources, natural wealths, and transnational companies couldn't have access to those lands because the guerrilla was their insurgents. After signing the peace treaty, some free trade agreements have been signed with the European Union, with Chile, with the US, and now these companies have access to these lands in order to extract natural resources. And that's why violence has increased, especially in terms of gold extraction, mining exploitations, oil, and water as well. And that's what has led to an increase in violence. If we were to locate corporations in Colombia, we would see where that most violence has happened in those places where the Colombian government has given contracts or licenses to companies that want to grab resources like water or resources in order to produce energy, like in the case of oil exploitations. that's what we would see the most.
Thank you, Nury. If there is anything that we can do based in Europe to try and raise awareness or to lobby or campaign or boycott, or if it's to talk to our politicians to encourage them to try and find a resolution to the situation, or anything, do let us know and we'll do what we can to support. But we would ask that you guide us so that we do something that's the most useful to you and to support your struggles. It's horrible to think of all the minerals and the gold and the things that go to Europe that are displacing the land rights of people across the world. And I think we all need to be very conscious in what we support and what we don't support, thinking about the human rights and the violation of land rights associated with the products we consume and our own government policies. Chris, I want to ask you, I was very inspired to hear about what you're doing with the Indian Treaty Council. I wanted to ask you if there are any successful cases of First People in the United States of America gaining back access to land, ones that you know of, or places where there's been big problems. I've been hearing about various protests going on across the US to try and keep sites that are important to First Peoples from being exploited. So if you could tell us more about those, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. So immediately when I'm thinking about kind of examples to talk about, the International Indian Treaty Council actually was able to, we were able to pay off our mortgage of our office, of our new office we just got last year through a grant, through one of our funders actually. And they recognized that the work that we're doing, and they said, hey, you know what, you guys need a place to work where you don't have to pay for your mortgage anymore, And so they were able to give us a grant that was able to for us to be able to pay off the rest of our mortgage on our office. So that's just one immediate example that I can think about of the right thing to do, or the things that people are doing today to kind of make amends to what has happened in the past. And our office is located in the city of Tucson, which today isn't on a reservation, but is on the traditional homelands of the Tanaka people. So in that way, at least, we feel like that was given back to us. We were given a place to work, and we're thankful for that. But also, there's a tribe in California, the Wiyot tribe. They were able to reclaim an island that they traditionally owned. And over the years, the city of Eureka actually took ownership of that island. But in 2015, the city of Eureka, the Eureka City Council, they were actually able to give a large portion of that island back to these people. And the Wiyot people actually had raised money to buy back some of their land, which that's kind of what we have to do in these times, is we actually have to use money to get our land back, which is terrible for many different reasons. But that's kind of one example. The city of Eureka was looked within themselves. They looked at what was the right thing to do, and that was the right thing to do, was to give them back the access to their island that they traditionally used for many years. But here, where I live now in Tucson, Arizona, there's many different cases around here about land grabs and land access. And one of those areas, actually, I just visited the other week, was Oak Flats. And that is an area here that was traditionally used by the San Carlos Apache tribe, used for many different reasons. And right now, that area is basically being stolen from them in order to buy a couple different mining corporations, one of them being Rio Tinto, to open up a huge copper mine that will only benefit people outside of the Apache people's lands. And so you know, in this area that I live in, you know, it's kind of seen as, and actually, one thing I just remembering now was that there was a statement made by a public official here in Arizona. I forget who exactly it was, but they were saying that Arizona is going to become the next Silicon Valley of mining, which is very scary to think about. And sadly enough, it's happening. Mines are opening up around this area, and people think, well, it's just a desert, right? You can just, you know, people aren't going to care if you dig into the earth in the desert, because people don't live there, but yet people do live there. People have histories here. And so my people now, the Hopi people, Navajo people, you know, we've been fighting for rights to just pray at certain areas. And the judicial system in the US is almost always against us as Indigenous peoples. And so that's one thing that we need to change. And hopefully with the changes that have been made to the US political system within the past few months, will allow us to make more strides in gaining much of our land back, because, you know, we're hoping that, you know, the future politics of the US will work with us to get our land back. And so you know, really thinking about it, you know, there are not many cases in which, you know, Indigenous peoples are given their land back. Many times we have to buy it back. We have to, you know, get our money and buy it back, which, you know, is kind of our last resort, or many times our only option, because it's very hard to do that. But also, one point I also kind of wanted to talk about earlier was borders, and how borders tie into this. Living here in Tucson, Arizona, I only live about an hour drive away from the US-Mexico border. And that has really been controversial for many different reasons. But for one of the reasons is that wall, the border wall, intersects directly through the original territory of the Tanatan people. You know, there are people that live on both sides of the US-Mexico border. And so that physical wall is basically cutting people in half. It's cutting people in half. And that in itself, also, that wall actually was cutting through a sacred spring to the Tanatan people, in which they were making their prayers, and they were using that as a sacred place. And that right now is under attack, and that spring is being desecrated in order to build this wall. And that land that wall is being built on is Tanatan land, yet the US government feels that they have the right to go and do that without the consultation of the Tanatan people. And so many Tanatan people are today trying to fight this, and trying to gain access to keep their access to visit their relatives on the other side of the wall, to move freely across that border without being harassed by the US Border Patrol, which I have been harassed many times by. And it's sad. It's sad that that's happening today. And we have a lot of progress to make in even getting to start talking about getting access to land back. I think we're still a ways away from it, but we're starting to make progress. You know, we're seeing, you know, land being given back to certain tribes, and you know, we're thinking, you know, that needs to happen on a larger scale, not only here in the US, but outside in all parts of the world. You know, we really need to be able to encourage our non-Indigenous brothers and sisters to think about, you know, what can we do to make amends to what, you know, colonizers have done to indigenous peoples in the past. And one of those is, you know, giving the land back to indigenous peoples. And so
I had a question here about another action that maybe you could both comment on quickly. We have 5 more minutes, and then also to wrap up a little bit. I think it's a bit partly how you know, how people can support land rights. And there's been a lot of comments here talking about the immorality of the extractivist economy and how much that impacts land rights. But it said, you know, people are generally quite blind to the impacts of mining, agriculture, and energy projects and those companies on land rights. But they trade on the stock exchange, and there's also many connections between the police and military and spy agencies and corporations to reinforce that, you know, that grabbing of land. And they ask, is divestment a tactic to expand from fossil fuel energy is it a tactic to expand from fossil fuel energy to these other sectors? And then maybe if you could both touch on, you only have 2 minutes because we have to stop very promptly, about what people can do to support, whether it's you know, changing where their pensions fund or what they do, or any other thing that they can do to support.
Yeah,
2 minutes each.
Yeah, I fully believe that divestment is a strong tactic to use, because, you know, money is the root of all evil, I guess you can say. So, you know, spending your money responsibly, or putting your money responsibly into stocks that, you know, that will be respectful and will acknowledge indigenous peoples and respect their work to fight to gain the access back to their lands. But divestment is really a strong tactic, and it's something that we practice at the Treaty Council. You know, we originally had a bank account with a certain bank, and we realized that their work that bank was funding was actually working against our work on the human rights area. So we have to divest from those companies. You have to do your research. But, you know, and this question is very common, and I always get asked it a lot, is what can, you know, people do to help aid in this fight? And I think, you know, first off, you know, actually, you know, money, you know, invest in indigenous peoples, invest in their projects and their programs to further their lives and the youth of indigenous peoples. Invest in them, and ask them questions, get their perspectives on things, learn about where you live and who used to live there or who lives there currently, and learn about what, you know, how they took care of the land, and how you can practice those same steps there where you live today. But, you know, don't forget about indigenous peoples, I guess is what I would like to also kind of close out with.
I agree. Thank you, Chris. And I've learned so much today. Nury, you have 2 minutes quickly. You know, Chris mentioned there supporting the projects of Indigenous people, or the projects supported by grassroots communities. You mentioned the agroecology schools, which I think is a brilliant thing that we can help start to get support for across the world. You know, that, you know, the work of Clock and La Via Campesina in South America. Nury, can you just close up now with you've got 2 minutes to try and say what people can do to support your struggles and further land rights, and to do that deep listening that Chris was just calling for.
Bueno, yo creo que lo más importante de poder apoyar a nivel...
Above all things, I think the most important would be to support the struggles. And in order to do so, I think we should question the economic model that prevails currently. I think we should question the industrial food system, and I think we should go back to the peasant farming methods. We should think about the difference in the means of production, in the way we produce, according to both different systems. And we should reflect upon what would be the best way to protect our environment, and what is our relationship to the land. I think above all, we should reflect upon the following. The problem doesn't come from the inherent inhabitants of the territory, but it comes from society as a whole. Above all things, we should make struggles visible. We want to strengthen agroecology and we want to fight against monoculture. We need to make people aware that monoculture and the industrial methods are bringing humanity to an end. We should endeavor to show to people that this needs to change. There is a lot of land in the hands of the few, and there are many who don't have access to land. Therefore, we need to stick together, because together we stand strong. And lastly, I would like to call on Europe. I think Europe can do a lot more. They have resources from their governments. Let's talk pension schemes, for instance. They also have international development aid. How are those economic resources being put to use? Because that international aid arrives in Colombia and they're using it for the extractivist model. Therefore, I think we should question what international aid funds are being used for in Latin America. We should also reflect upon what international aid funds are being used for in Africa. And I would like to bring these elements to the debate because we're all talking here about defending the environment and the planet. And lastly, thank you very much for this invitation. I am very pleased to be part of this important space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nury. And we're all in this together.